All right, all right. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Lee Camp. He's the comedian and he's also the host of Moment of Clarity with Lee Camp. Welcome back, Lee. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Lee, I wanted to start off by talking about this war with Russia and Ukraine. I mean, obviously, this is a big topic, I think, for like the past year and a half. It was just, I think, a couple of weeks ago, there was a whistleblower who released documents from the Pentagon, leaked documents on Discord, and I think maybe some other platforms as well. And one of the pieces of information that was released is that the United States government had actually no intention of trying to come to some sort of peace resolution with this war this year. And I want to get your take on that and this whistleblower, so to speak, which I was kind of skeptical about. I didn't believe that a 21-year-old did this. I felt like maybe he was taking the fall for someone else. But I want to get your take on that. What do you think about the U.S. government not really moving towards any type of peace resolution with this war?
Well, it's what a lot of us were saying in the first few months, that the U.S. had sought to end the peace negotiations that were ongoing between the Zelensky government and Russia, and that when they were at their closest point of actually signing something, that it would have ended, within a month of it beginning. Boris Johnson, who was still prime minister then, and in his clown car, went rolling up to Ukraine and basically told Zelensky that, A, to end any peace talks, and B, even if he were to sign something, his Western backers would not back him any longer. So it was basically like, you have no choice. There's no way you can sign a peace agreement that will allow you to actually hold that agreement. And so, yeah, the U.S. has been doing that since the beginning, making sure this goes on essentially as long as possible. I mean, now you're seeing a bit of a rift in the ruling elite, where there is a faction of ruling elite who are equal war criminals, but a faction of them that want to see this wrapped up because they see that it's actually harming the U.S. empire, speeding the great splitting of the world's economies. And Kissinger among them, So if you need a better war criminal credentials for someone telling the U.S. to wrap this up quickly, and in terms of the questioning the whistleblower and the leaks, I myself was skeptical at first, because generally when there is a legitimate leak of documents, the mainstream media first avoids covering it at all when it's harmful to the U.S. But the reason we have now learned is the mainstream media was basically running interference to try and get most of America to focus on specific areas of these leaks and to ignore the most many of the most important leaks in these documents. So the mainstream media was doing a job to try to minimize the harm done to the U.S. empire. And these leaks, I've done episodes on now. It's not that there's no articles on some of the more important leaks. It's that they're really minimized. I mean, the fact that the U.S. is spying on our allies, including Israel, the fact that U.S. allies are jumping ship, including Egypt, had actually considered sending 40,000 munitions to Russia. It's unclear whether they ever did it. It seems likely they didn't do it, but the fact that they were even considering that behind America's back shows how much American power has waned over the past many years. But most importantly, I think out of these leaks was we learned that months ago, we nearly entered nuclear war. I mean, Russia nearly shot down and actually fired a missile at what turned out to be a British spy plane, meaning Russia actually either attempted, or there's some confusion as to whether it was an accident, but either way, they were aiming and firing at a British spy plane, which if they had hit it, who knows where we'd be right now? Like the fact that the US and the UK would put us into this proxy war that puts us on the brink of nuclear war is insanity. It is. These are. I think we need a word that means sociopath moron. Sociopath moron. Something that we need some word for that, because that's what these people are. They're sociopaths and they're morons at the same time, and it's endangering all of us.
100%. And I know you mentioned the economy. One of the things that has not worked out the way that the U.S. government thought it would was harming Russia with economic sanctions, right? So it turns out that the sanctions that they've implemented on Russia is actually harming other countries. I talked about the UK before, how they couldn't pay for heat. So they set up these facilities called warm banks that people could go to get heat if they couldn't afford to pay for their heat bill because of the pipeline. I talked about the struggle that was going on in Germany a couple of months ago when people told me that Germany would be fine. A couple of days ago, I just reported on the fact that Germany has now officially entered a recession, and they are the fourth largest economy in the world. And then also on the other side of this is that you have BRICS, which now actually has other countries that are interested in joining BRICS. And Saudi Arabia, in particular, I think is one that I'm surprised the Biden administration seems to be kind of silent about this. But Saudi Arabia, which has been a pretty strong partner of the United States, particularly because of oil, even they have decided to move in a direction in reference to BRICS, trying to make some type of partnership with China. And you would think that the US government would say, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? But it just seems like to me, for the Biden administration, it seems like it's not even a significant factor. What's your take on that about other countries trying to say, you know what, from now on, we're not going to listen to what the US government is doing. We're going to start our own thing, and we're going to try to be a significant power in the world.
Oh, behind closed doors, they're shitting themselves. They are absolutely doing everything they can to stop BRICS. First of all, to stop a competitor to the petrodollar central banking system, which Saudi Arabia is the key partner in the petrodollar continuing. And for anyone who, doesn't realize it, the reason we can print unlimited money, which we do, and it still keeps its power, it doesn't become meaningless, is because it's the petrodollar, because oil from OPEC is sold mainly in US dollars, which also makes it the world reserve currency. So many countries have their reserve money in dollars. And that's what gives us the ability to just print endless money. And we increased the monetary supply in the US by 20% just during the pandemic. In any other country or most other countries, the money would become borderline meaningless if you did that. But the U.S. can do it because of the petrodollar. So, yeah, they are totally shitting themselves. And in terms of, and this connects to that portion of the answer, but in terms of how much this proxy war has harmed, which, by the way, for those who aren't sure, many higher ups in the U.S. ruling elite have called it a proxy war, including Leon Panetta, former head of the CIA, said on TV, this is a proxy war. But the harming to European economies is not actually an accident. It is part of what this was intended to do. Now, many of the sanctions have boomeranged and harming the U.S. too, which was not intended. But in terms of harming European states and pushing them back into a vassal system underneath the United States, that is a large percentage of what this proxy war was meant to do, among other things. But we were very upset. The U.S. empire was very upset at the allying of Russia with Germany and the economic cooperation, which obviously Nord Stream was a huge part of. So the U.S. has now bombed that pipeline, cut off economic ties between Russia and Europe, which that was part of what we wanted, what our government wanted, and has succeeded at. But also harming European economies. It doesn't matter if people are freezing at night. Like, the U.S. doesn't care. The goal of the U.S. government was to push much of Europe back into a vassal system underneath the United States, and we've largely done that. I mean, much of Europe is now just doing whatever the U.S. says, including Germany, one of the most powerful nations in that bloc. And Germany is suffering and yet still going along with what the U.S. has said. Germany hasn't even done an investigation of who blew up their goddamn pipeline. I mean, how is that? It's insane. It's insane that they would do that. But of course, I guess it's testament to the fact the U.S. still has a lot of power and Germany is still under U.S. thumb. But so those parts have been a success for the U.S. in this proxy war, this absolutely lunatic level proxy war. But much of it has not been a success, which is it has caused many countries, Russia, China, many others, to run towards BRICS, to run away from the petrodollar. We have shown by stealing Russia's assets that were outside Russia and stealing Venezuelan assets that were outside Venezuela or were in US dollars and stealing some other countries' assets, Afghanistan, it has shown to many countries that have dollar reserve currencies, oh, shit, we can't trust that this money will be there. All we have to do is slightly go against the US and they can just steal all our money. And so many countries are, like you said, running to the BRICS cooperation, group that are coming together. They're joining their economies, and there's been many sales now in oil outside of the petrodollar, in petro yuan, for example. And so this is a big deal. This is honestly, I think we'll look back at this and we'll say, well, this was the beginning of the end of the American empire, which in many ways could be a good thing, but I don't support any war, so I'm not going to support a war that kills tens of thousands of Ukrainians and creates millions of refugees either. So,
what do you think is going to happen to Ukraine when this war officially ends? Because my prediction is that their economy is going to be destroyed. I'm looking at countries like Yemen. Look at how Yemen looks today. It's terrible. Like nobody can live there. And even after the war is over, then you still have to deal with the environmental catastrophes. People still have to breathe that air. And I think people don't think about that as well. What do you think is going to happen to that country when this officially ends?
I mean, I think probably what it'll be most similar to is Iraq, where, we go in, we destroy a country beyond all recognition, and then we help them rebuild, which means sell off their assets, their resources, put in some sort of puppet government. I mean, I guess we got one in there right now. And Ukraine has already signaled that they're ready to sell off all their resources, to sell off their infrastructure, even to the point that Zelensky has rang the opening bell on the stock market in the U.S. via video and said Ukraine's open for business. Well, what does open for business mean on the U.S. stock exchange? It means these massive companies can buy up our assets, our resources. These are resources that should be given to the Ukrainian people. They should not be sold to giant corporations that obviously will go after profit over all else, no matter how much it harms people. The people of Ukraine, the people of the world, doesn't matter. If there's profit there, they'll grab it up. He's selling off infrastructure, including transportation. And so I think that's what the U.S. wants. But the question is whether, this rift in the ruling elite will mean that this war wraps up, at least the most destructive aspects of it wraps up sooner rather than later, or whether the U.S., what many of the ruling elite all want is for kind of an endless war that just continues to drain Russia. So that is also something that many of these U.S. sociopaths, many of our governmental sociopaths want to happen.
Yeah, I hear you. What's your take on, so obviously the elections are coming up. We're heading into 2024. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Has spoke out tremendously in reference to this war, but other wars as well. But there are some issues also with RFK Jr. I interviewed Marianne Williamson. We talked to her about this particular war. She said at that point in time that we should still support Ukraine monetarily. That was at that point in time. I think her position has changed a little bit since then. When we go into the 2024 election, how important do you think where a candidate stands on this particular issue is going to matter to voters?
Well, first of all, and I talk about I've talked about this primary as well, so I'm not criticizing you. But I always like to begin with the caveat of, why are we talking about the election already? It's so insane. And I do it too. So I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying, like, we have these elections once every 4 years, and we spend 2.5 years talking about them. And you and I don't, but much of the mainstream media uses that to then cover every other issue that should be talked about in the world. I think people should spend about 5% of their time discussing this. But anyway, beyond that, I also do have thoughts. Marianne Williamson, I think she's good on some things. I think she's one of the few candidates in the last election on the Democratic side that actually talked about maybe we should actually spend money towards peace rather than war. There are some important things she says, but there's a lot of things that leave me wanting in many ways. I believe she said the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan to protect the women, which is one of the dumbest. we need to keep dropping bombs to protect and killing innocent women to protect the women. That's interesting. But anyway, in terms of RFK, he is really fascinating in my view, because he is grabbing so many third rails of American politics. You cannot talk about the wars the way he has. You can't talk about corporations running the government the way he has. You can't talk about the environmental destruction the way he has. You can't talk about factory farming or big pharma the way he has. So there's so many third rails that he has grabbed. He also has I don't know if he said the exact sentence, the CIA murdered my uncle, but he's essentially said it in many ways. And so he says that. Now, then he also leaves you a little bit confused as to his tweets about the CIA is mainly filled with wonderful, brave folks such as my daughter-in-law. And you're kind of like, wait, a second ago they killed your uncle. What? What happened? But that being said, I am very impressed with many of the third rails he's grabbed. I also, and I would like to raise this alarm early if people want to start thinking about this, that of course they're going to do all of the tricks that they did to rig it against Bernie Sanders in 2016. Really, none of that has changed. All of it will remain the same. They already have begun the maligning of RFK's character to just justify further ways to rig it against him later, even to the point of, it seems, banning channels and banning videos basically for speaking to him, YouTube channels. So the suppression and the attacks have begun in a large way by the mainstream media and others. And so that's step one. But if he were to get further than that and get past all of the ways it's rigged by money, past all the ways it's rigged by black box voting machines, past all the ways it's rigged by super delegates, if he were to get past all of that, since Bernie ran in 2016, the DNC has added a new rule to their bylaws, which says they can eliminate any candidate who is not Democratic enough, whatever that means. They don't define it. So there is now a nuclear option, unless they're going to remove it. There is now a nuclear option where the DNC, no matter what, could just say, you know what? We've watched some of his speeches. We don't think he's really one of us, and they could knock him out. That didn't exist before 2016, but it does now. And so I'm not saying they'll use it, but at the very least, people should be talking about the fact that they now can do that type of thing. And of course, people should be aware of the standard sheepdog model, where you get all of the strong left-wing people who like what RFK is saying together, and then you at the very end of it, you go, too bad I didn't make it. Vote for the Democrat.
Yep. Yep. No, I hear you. I totally hear you. I think another issue that has come up recently, his position in reference to Israel and Palestine, that's a hot button now for people.
With Roger Waters, yeah.
Yeah.
He backed away from support of Roger Waters, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. This is just, it's a mess. Do you think that anyone else will come forward to run?
I'm planning, and this is a big announcement, I'm planning on being the campaign manager for it's like a grayish brown rock I found in my yard. And you should see its platform. It's really incredible. And I just hope people will stay tuned to leecamp.net, because I think this stone I found in my yard has a good shot. I mean, especially if he's going up against, multiple war criminals.
I think they're talking about a possibility of Joe Manchin, which is kind of crazy.
As if the Democratic Party could get any more Republican.
No, I know it's crazy. It's crazy. In reference to, I guess I would say not just this issue with Russia and Ukraine, but the money to be made here. Okay, so Zelensky made it very clear that BlackRock is coming into Ukraine. He's working out some type of deal with them. There's a military industrial complex, which always profits from war. We're seeing billions and billions of dollars go out the door to Ukraine. And I think, at least from my perspective, I think more Americans are starting to wake up to it, and they're starting to ask questions like, wait a minute, you have billions and billions of dollars to give to another country, and yet we're trying to figure out how to pay rent. Or, we're trying to figure out how we're going to pay for groceries. You remove people from Medicaid when you change the pandemic emergency status. Like, what is happening here? Now, I will say, I think more people are starting to notice that our government has plenty of money, but they choose to spend it in such a way that does not benefit the people. Do you think that will have an impact come 2024, the way that people choose to vote?
I mean, I hope so. I hope people realize that. Yeah, the U.S. has all the money you can possibly imagine. You cannot even begin to comprehend the amount of money, and especially the amount of money dumped into our military. $1 trillion a year, over $1 trillion if you add the black budget. And $21 trillion, actually more than that now, of unaccounted for financial adjustments in the Pentagon's books. They've failed 5 audits, the only audits they've ever had. And when we say audits, we mean 1,000 people working for a year trying to audit the Pentagon. They have just walked out at the end and said, and they failed the audit. In the last one, last November, they said they couldn't account for half of all their assets. And when I say assets, I don't just mean like guns and things. I mean like buildings and helicopters. They don't know where half of their shit is. If you had any other job and you said, I can't find half of my inventory, you would be in prison. If you sold jewels, or you worked at a store, or you worked at a daycare, and you said, we started with 12 children, I have 7 here, you would be in prison. And the Pentagon does that. Literally, they've admitted they can't account for half their assets. And so anyway, to get back to your question, the point is we dump all this money into this stuff, and we don't have money for healthcare. We don't have money we got to cut food stamps. We got to cut public schools. It's disgusting. It's repulsive. And again, it's sociopathic. And like you said, billions of dollars going to Ukraine, over 100 billion. Seymour Hersh also just a few weeks ago revealed that he's had many sources and evidence that upwards of $400 million has been skimmed off by Zelensky and his crew in the government. Basically, they're just taking their cut. And it's so much, $400 million, that even I believe it was the CIA, has gone to the Ukrainian government and said, this is a bit much that's going missing. Like, we understood we would understand if you took 100 million, but this is 400 million. I mean, that is where our money's going. And meanwhile, everybody here in America, we have 16, 17 million empty houses around this country, and yet people aren't housed. We have 64% of Americans say didn't know how to pay for basic necessities over the past year. And meanwhile, we dump $1 trillion into a military that is just a giant money laundering scheme. It's disgusting. And I hope it influences people's vote in one way or another.
Well said. I want to pivot into the censorship aspect, because obviously this has been a big issue for you and for other commentators and journalists, especially over the past 2 years. I think it's become significantly worse this year. What is your take on the information that has been discovered from the Twitter files? And would you like to see, at least I would like to see, a YouTube files? Yeah. I would like to see YouTube files or Facebook files, but what's your take on the information that has been uncovered there? And do you consider Elon Musk to be a hero, or do you feel like we should still look at him with a wary eye?
Yeah, well, for those who don't know, I had a TV show for 8 years called Redacted Tonight. A year ago, it was canceled by U.S. sanctions. In that same week, the YouTube channel that we had built to 250,000 subscribers was banned around the world. Over 2,000 videos banned around the world. They're still banned. My podcast, which was not even part of the Redacted Tonight entity, was also banned by Spotify. I've now put it up under a new name, The Lee Camp Show. But and at the same time, I've been shadow banned on places like Facebook and Twitter. Now, what you're saying about Twitter files, it absolutely revealed what many of us have been talking about for several years. We just didn't have the proof. We had the numbers proof. We could go, hey, isn't it funny that I used to, gain followers in the thousands, and now I can't seem to scrape two together. So we had that kind of proof, but we didn't have the actual evidence. And so now we do from the Twitter files, which if you want evidence of how guilty our government is in censoring Twitter and other social media platforms, when this was revealed by Matt Taibbi and others that Elon Musk gave the files to, they've now weaponized the IRS and other entities against Matt Taibbi. The day he released the Twitter files, the IRS opened a file on him. And the day he testified in front of Congress, they went to his house and raided his house. So the IRS is now weaponized against journalists like Taibbi for revealing things like the Twitter files. And like I said, it just absolutely proves what many of us have said, that these social media platforms are essentially an arm of the government. They're so accountable to anything the government wants. And thousands of people, many of them not with popular shows like mine or even well-known at all, have had their pages suppressed, deleted, somehow canceled. And it's both right and left wing, but, a lot of people like to focus on the right wing. But the truth is there's many left wingers, if you're outside of what's acceptable on mainstream media, who have been heavily suppressed and canceled on these social media platforms. And of course, YouTube is another one, and they've been exactly the same. The YouTube CEO, this is a couple of years ago, said in an interview that they had succeeded in decreasing viewing of extremist videos by 70%. Well, what does she consider extremist? Yeah, Nazis. But then what they don't say is they're also throwing in, my stuff. They're also throwing in anybody who's actually anti-war, anyone who actually doubts whether we're just there to help the Ukrainian people. Like, that's considered extremist. So, they have crushed the views of so many of us. And, we keep struggling. I keep struggling to try and keep talking about the same things I've always been talking about for years now. But the landscape has very much changed. And these social media platforms are more than happy to be at the beck and call of the FBI and the CIA and our intel agencies.
That's right, 100%. I think people have to understand. I know people who weren't even monetized like ever, and they are being suppressed. Like it's a problem. 4 or 5 years ago, also maybe 6 years ago, this was not a big issue. Like if you were independent and you did political commentary, like you could grow pretty quickly, especially during election season. Like you could grow pretty fast. But then YouTube changed their algorithm, and it made it harder to find independent political commentators. And so anyone who came in after that algorithm change has had to find a way to fight against that. Do you think that platforms like Rumble will eventually become to the point where maybe because they are allowing more free speech content on their platform, where they may eventually overtake a platform like YouTube?
Well, look, I'm at Rumble, rumble.com/Lee Camp. That's where a lot of my live streams are. And there's a lot about them that I like. They are anti-censorship. Obviously, it sucks that the first people to run to the anti-censorship platforms were largely, or 90%, the farthest right wingers. And, I'm no fan of being crazy right wing. But at the same time, it's like YouTube has said to me and anyone who's genuinely anti-war or anti-capitalist or anti-empire that you're not welcome here. So it's like, where are we going to go? We're going to go to the platforms that will allow us to continue to speak the truth. And yeah, I mean, I hope it keeps growing, and hopefully it gets to the point that enough people make the shift that YouTube's not the only game in town. But you know, our government has a lot of ways of stopping these type of things and slowing them down. And, you know, especially without net neutrality anymore, they could, if they ever wanted to, they could legitimately just slow down or literally just slow down the traffic. So you have a tough time loading videos if they wanted to. We need, a lot of work needs to be done to get back to a place where these are free and open squares where people can talk about the issues in a real way, not in a way that's just CNN and Fox News approved talking points. But yeah, so I am on Rumble, and I you know, it allows me to grow in a way that YouTube won't. And you know, we haven't mentioned Facebook, but years ago, Facebook was my big platform. I had 332, I think, thousand followers. I was gaining like 5,000 a week. And basically, the moment the 2016 election happened, you know how many followers I've had since then? I have 332,000 now. So basically, I'm not allowed to gain followers. It may tell you followed me, but they're unsubscribing at an equal rate, so that I never gain on my size of my Facebook page. Isn't that interesting? You know, that couldn't be intentional, right? That's just a coincidence that I haven't gained a follower in whatever 9 years or 7 years.
Yeah, they'll do that to people. And that being said, my final question for you, Lee, is what advice would you give to someone who's considering starting a political commentary channel or doing independent journalism, given the level of censorship that we have today?
I mean, I would highly recommend that they instead just pick up a drinking habit. I think that's just a far better choice. No, I want people to be doing the same thing as us, which means to be passionate about these issues and to actually look about what's going on in the world and then to speak about what's going on in the world. So I highly encourage them. But I will say that every video you watch on how to do well on YouTube or those things, it doesn't really apply to people who are speaking about these issues. It might apply to someone putting up skateboard or cat videos, but it doesn't apply equally to us. And many times you can see when you're a new channel, you know, I started a new channel 2 years ago or something because I knew my old one was suppressed. And you can see a lot of growth initially because they apparently have not decided yet that you need to be stopped. But then as you continue to grow, it tends to the algorithm, or maybe it's human beings. You know, I don't always know whether something's done by an algorithm or a human being, but you'll see it become very difficult. And it's like trying to run uphill waist deep in mud, no matter what you try. And it really sucks. But I think we still have to use these tools. You know, I'm not one of these people that's like, delete your Facebook, delete your YouTube, because these are tools that can be used by activists and those who want to create change in this world, who want a sustainable and a peaceful world. They are tools that can be used, and the tools, you know, we're up against the largest goddamn power this world has ever seen, the largest military, the largest corporate governance this world has ever seen. And no one said it was going to be easy. And no one said they were just going to let you walk in and change things. So I think keep using the tools, but look to have a lot of tools in that tool bag. Look for a lot of different outlets. You know, maybe the ones that are not censoring as of yet, and just try and get the message out there in a lot of different places, I guess.
Awesome. Well, Lee, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you?
Yeah, leecamp.net is my locals page, which has all my videos. Locals is like Patreon and Facebook kind of combined, but anti-censorship. And then rumble.com/leecamp is probably the best place.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lee.
Thanks so much. Yeah.